Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Shakyra Diaz. I am the Partnership Director for the Alliance for Safety and Justice, and I will be your hostess with the mostest today. I'm super excited to host this amazing panel entitled Shared Safety, Putting the Public into public safety. So how do we do that? We're going to talk about that today. We're going to be led through this by the experts in the field on this topic. We're going to talk to researchers. We're going to talk to the professionals who have created this model and implement this model, who are tweaking the model. And I'm really excited to share this time with you. So we are going to hear from all these amazing people. Everyone's going to have an opportunity to speak, and you, as attendees, are going to have the opportunity to ask questions. So get ready, get comfortable. So we also want to keep a couple of things in mind, right? We've had this tremendous amount of change in the last 9 months that has really shaken our worlds, but has also exposed some things that have been very apparent to people who have been working in the public health sector as well as the safety sector. With that in mind, the Alliance for Safety and Justice has worked to create, in partnership with a number of organizations, the National Coalition for Shared Safety. And that coalition is working really to elevate some of these issues, right, that we've been seeing. It represents leading organizations that are advancing community safety solutions, right? Where people are often talking about the problems, we're talking about solutions. Joining together to promote the most effective strategies to achieve public safety for all. We have lived in a world where only some people have know what it's like to live in a safe community. And we want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to enjoy that life. So I want to, at this point, kick it over to Aqeela Sherrills, a man that needs no introduction. He's also my brother. You may be able to see the resemblance there. Aqeela Sherrills is the president of the Newark Community Street Team. Aqeela, I'm kicking it over to you.
It would help if I was off of mute. Thank you so much, Shakyra, for the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon to our guests and friends. Aqeela Sherrills, I'm the president of the Newark Community Street Team. Just excited to be sharing this new report that we just produced, the report on community-based public safety, right? Community-based public safety is an initiative that's been around, for 25, 30 plus years. They used to call it gang intervention. They used to call it violence intervention. Well, those who are the practitioners and the thought leaders in this country on this work have redefined this term, and we want to call it community-based public safety, because essentially you can't have public safety without the public. And this idea of law enforcement as a single point of contact for safety in our community has literally failed us. It's produced a number of unintended consequences and collateral damage that have cost us a significant amount of resources and lives, in terms of this imbalance, right? Community-based public safety is about community engaging public safety as a complementary strategy to policing. That this is a solution that we're talking about in terms of this collective work, right? And so I want to say a little bit about what it looks like on the ground in terms of the work that I do with the Newark Community Street Team. So NCST is the City of Newark's community-based public safety initiative. It was seeded by the mayor, or envisioned by the mayor and seeded by philanthropy. We are an organization that looks at violence through the public health lens. We have a three-pronged strategy: high-risk intervention, assertive outreach, victim services. We hire and train residents from neighborhoods. We train them in conflict resolution and mediation, de-escalation strategies, trauma-informed approaches, and we deploy them at those key intersections, at hospitals and in schools, at community, and also at law enforcement. Our high-risk intervention team intervenes in individual and group conflicts. They mediate those situations to a peaceful outcome. They utilize their relationships as credible messengers in the neighborhood to intervene in conflicts and to help mediate them to a peaceful outcome, right? The way that they get these type of referrals is one, through relationships in the community. Again, these are credible messengers. 100% of our staff live in the neighborhoods in which they serve, right? And so they get information because they live in these neighborhoods. But we also receive information and intelligence from law enforcement because over the 5 years now that we've been working together, they've gone to trust us. They understand that there's a high threshold in terms of arrest and prosecution, and they don't always have all of the elements to do that. So they reach out to us, they share intelligence with us so that we can continue to utilize that information as a way of reducing violence and crime. We also engage our hospital-based violence intervention program in Newark. NCST co-launched our hospital-based violence intervention program. So when individuals are harmed and they go into the hospital, so before Raheem transitions back into community, our high-risk intervention team develops a safety plan, meets with those individuals who are potentially a part of the conflict that sent them to the hospital, so that we can make sure that folks are safe all the way around. That's the primary focus, is safety, right? Our assertive outreach, we do safe passage around key schools in the neighborhood. We did a study with the health department and discovered that most of the violence happens in and around schools. Things happen on campus on Friday morning that spills into the community on the weekend, and then vice versa, right? And so our our assertive outreach team, again, made up of credible messengers, are deterrent. They're at key exit and entries at the school. They make sure our kids go to school safely and they come home safely, right? And then the piece of the work that kind of ties it together, and that is the theory of change in our collective work, is our victim services. We did a report, a national report with Californians for Safety and Justice, and then the Alliance for Safety and Justice, and discovered that less than 20% of people who are victimized even know that victim comp and victim services actually exist. A lot of people associate victims comp with being able to pay for funeral services, but it also pays for wage replacement. When your house is broken into, it can repair, the things that were broken. You can repair the things that were taken. There's a lot of different ways. There's therapy and counseling, the secondary support for victimization. All of these things are provided by the victim's advocate in collaboration and partnership with all of these, with the high-risk intervention team. And then we do that work collectively as a part of our public safety roundtable, the advocacy work that has to happen in community. Now, the result of this work in Newark over the past 5 years. Now, Newark has been on the top in the top 10 most violent city list for almost 50 consecutive years. Wow. But in 2014, when the mayor launched the Safer Newark Council to coordinate his public safety strategy and put NCST in place, in our first year of work, we decreased homicides in the city by double digits. We've now had 4 consecutive years in a row of decreases of homicide and murder. In the South Ward, where we target our initiative, we've had a negative 48% reduction in homicides in the neighborhood. During our protest and the honoring of George Floyd's life that was taken, with excessive force by law enforcement, we had over 12,000 people attend the protest in the city and had 0 arrests because of our coordinated strategy around public safety with law enforcement. In addition, June 24th, we supported the mayor through our advocacy with the Public Safety Roundtable in moving 5% of the city's police department's budget, a $230 million budget, into a new office of violence prevention and trauma recovery, where 60% of those dollars will be allocated to community-based organizations to help fill out public safety infrastructure in community, right? We used to think that, hey, you make an arrest, problem solved, neighborhood safe. But the reality is that there's a tremendous amount of maintenance that has to take place after that arrest. Because once that individual is in jail, they're not dead, right? They can cause shots that impact the street and then vice versa. And so someone has to remain in the middle of these relationships, connecting them to trauma services and healing services and development services, right? In order to maintain safety in communities. And so, this work, like NCST is not unlike any of our partners who are doing this work in multiple cities across the country. So just in terms of the report, 3 key findings that we lay out in the report. That community-based intervention has been around for close to 30 years. We're operating in over 200 cities across the country with just as many programs. That some of the organizations that you might know just to name, like Cure Violence or the Professional Community Intervention Training Institute, Chicago CRED, Advanced Peace, these organizations have been on the ground, evidence-based results. that shows that we can reduce violence and crime without law enforcement and as a complement to law enforcement. Right? And so this is, some of the findings that you will find out, that community-based intervention is not willy-nilly work. It operates on standard operating procedures and protocols, and that honestly, this is an inflection point in history and such a profound opportunity for us, right? That this is, the National Coalition for Shared Safety is delivering up practical solutions that are already shovel-ready. You know what I'm saying? This is about an investment in public safety infrastructure, because as we began, you can't have public safety without the public, right? And I want to turn it back over to our sister Shakyra. Thank you.
Thank you, Aqeela. That was amazing. Wow. An office within a city that works on violence prevention, not responding to violence, but preventing violence from happening. Just want to commend you for your great work there, and for highlighting key points in this report. I want to transition, so we've covered Newark. I want to transition over to Chicago. I want to introduce Melvyn Hayward from Chicago Cred. Take it away, Melvyn.
Thank you, Brother Aqeela. You were definitely on point. What I, like to focus on initially, and then I'll answer some questions that I have. But what I'll say is, at Chicago Cred, our primary focus is really looking at the work from 5 pillars. The first pillar is outreach, and it's important at the tip of the spear, outreach workers in the community, building relationships, responding to incidents, conflict mediation and resolution. And so their role is extremely critical, and they're the primary referral system to our program. And so those outreach workers are from those communities, have a high level of license to operate. And the goal is really for them to be the primary conduit to referring young people to our program. In our program, we serve folks from the age of 18 to 30, and we believe that number is critical. The second pillar is our life coaching case management pillar, where that is really the process of mentoring and helping a young person transition their mindset and helping to set goals that are realistic, worthwhile, and attainable. The third pillar is our clinical piece. And so we have about 20 members on our clinical team providing services around CBT, mentoring, but
What's
also
CBT?
It's the I'll follow up with that. But also, it's really about stabilizing an individual to help deal with the trauma, the compound trauma and vicarious trauma that's happening in the community. Thank you, Elizabeth. Cognitive behavioral therapy. My apology.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
And then our next pillar is education. And so we believe that as we're working with the participants, education is a priority. And oftentimes what we see in our population is young people have fell out of way of high school, didn't complete their education. And so our primary goal is to make sure that our participants graduate. And so we operate a program called Penn Foster, where every participant, as they work through our 18-month program, has the ability to graduate. We just had a graduation recently. 40 of our participants graduated. Beautiful sight, drive-by graduation because of COVID, but we believe that's a critical element. Our last and certainly not least pillar is employment and training. And so if you want to replace the young people being involved in the illegal economy, you have to do something about that. And so we prepare our participants in the employment and training phase and soft skills, hard skills. They have job coaches to help them prepare for employment. And then as they transition out, we have employment placement for every one of our participants that are ready to transition into jobs or become an entrepreneur. So we believe operating in those 5 pillars is extremely important. It's definitely a wraparound approach, and we're happy to say that upwards of now we've served about 400 young men and women in the year of 2020. And, the mission continues. Chicago has been hit hard with violence. We have over 700 homicides this year. And obviously this is a perfect storm. You got COVID, you got the civil unrest, and you have, the issues around community-based issues about violence and just the continued conflicts that have happened in Chicago historically. But what I'll say is, obviously, I've been a part of training and implementing programs in communities across the country. And so some of the defining things that I think is important to talk about is leadership of organizations and communities that are implementing violence prevention strategies is extremely important. And so we've ran into organizations that had leadership that really didn't understand community-based public safety.
Right.
And so what we found is that organizations that had leadership that didn't understand it didn't fully invest in the team on the ground and made decisions that were counterproductive to the progress of those folks that were doing the work. And so it's important to have leadership that understands the work and is invested in that process long-term.
Melvyn, can I ask you a question?
For sure.
So I love that you framed the 5 pillars, right? As a grounding foundation. Given that, given what you shared, given all your work, and what you're just highlighting regarding like who needs to be in this work, how do you customize this model and introduce it in different locations?
Well, first thing, this is not a cookie cutter approach. And so when you go into a community and you do your assessment, it's important to hear from those that are on the ground doing the work, the organizations that are leading the work, law enforcement, to really get an understanding of what their beliefs are, if they support the work or not, but also hear from the community. And so it's important to hear from the population that's being served to get a better understanding of what their needs are, what the issues are in the community, and then craft a strategy that enhances what's already happening in that community. And so it's not about developing a model that you can just fly into a community and say, do A, B, and C, and this will work. It's really about assessing what's working well, eliminating some of the things that haven't worked well, and then enhance those services based on some of the things that we know across the board and folks on this panel have been doing for quite some time. And so it depends on where that organization or that city is at in their strategy and working to continue to build up the strategy and get the right people on the ground. What I will say is what I've seen in various cities is sometimes you don't have the right people that's focused on serving the highest risk population. And so what I mean by that is it's extremely important to have those people who are involved in shootings and then at highest risk of being shot. The only way you can reduce violence in the community is by working with those who are involved in violence. And so we believe that that's a critical element. It's not about, and so I can speak for Chicago CRED. We don't serve at-risk individuals, and we don't serve folks that are high risk. We serve the highest risk. And in order for us across this country to reduce violence, I think we have to change the strategy and really focus on those that are at highest risk of being engaged in that lifestyle.
Thank you, Melvyn. Thank you for all of that. I wanna transition over to Dr. Aquil Basheer, the Dr. Aquil Basheer, from BUILD and Professional Community Intervention Training Institute, as well as an official member of the National Coalition for Shared Safety. So Dr. Basheer, can you build off of some of what Melvyn and Aqeela has shared to just talk to us about how the fundamentals have been established, right? How the standard operating procedures are established and how they were developed, and why is it important to hold those dear to this model?
You're on mute, Brother Aquil.
Doctor, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you, Shakyra.
There you go. Of course.
Excellent job, Aqeela, Melvin. Good work to all the team and everybody that's involved. Because my time is short, I'm gonna be real specific. Excellent question you posed, Shakyra. What are SOPs? What are SOGs? Standard operating procedures and standard operating guidelines. Why are they so important? Every professional operational infrastructure has protocol which defines the criteria, the step-by-step procedure that they operate from. An SOP is inflexible. An organization will come in and develop SOPs based on the culture and the value system it operates from. The SOGs are standard operating guidelines. They are flexible. They are used to go into a situation, usually situationally specific. Where people get mixed when they talk about procedures and they talk about establishing anchors is the fact that they don't concentrate on the fundamentals of what SOPs are supposed to do. When you look at a situation, SOPs establishes your protocol. Your protocol defines how you operate. The operational standard becomes the code of conduct that not only you hold the team to, but gives them the blueprint for what they're supposed to do in unique situations. We operate across the country, as you well know. So how do we use these SOPs when we go into these different environments? We will have to bring the individuals, as was said earlier, to the table. You are operating and developing your SOPs based on the needs of the targeted population in which you serve. So you don't come in there with a set standard. Your standards are going to be predicated on those individuals and what they tell you they need. Hence why it has to be inclusion of that voice of the community, because you can't establish where you want to go and where you want to take them without that clarity. Moving forward, excuse me, from that, how are they developed? Those that are effective in developing true SOPs that work to enhance a given community come from actual engagement. Your SOPs as trainers train you are not established from their norm of thinking. They go through actual situations that are debriefed. These situations are torn apart. You find out what worked, what did not work. How do we move forward? What do we need to bring to the table? What was not there? Then you develop a lesson plan, which is got to be tried. This is why in training, it is so imperative that your training be scenario driven. Once you establish what SOPs are, you have to make sure you can put people in the place to utilize those SOPs, and then you evaluate that level of accountability. Do we need to change them? Do we need to alter them, etc.? Remember this, training is behavior modification. When you come into a venue to train somebody, either you're trying to alter behavior, add new behavior, restructure old behavior, or put infrastructure in place that refines the existing behavior on board. So to do that, you have to make sure in that process, you are crystal clear on where you're trying to take that group. You have to be crystal clear on what are the objectives that group wants to establish. And then more importantly, you have got to make sure that those standard operating procedures or those protocols are going to get them to a place of effectiveness in terms of where they want to go. Third, when you talk about the importance of protocol establishes the professionalism in the benchmark an operation or an individual will stand on. I should be able to look at your protocol. The first thing I do when I step into a city, I say, let me see your protocol, because that's going to tell me what you're doing, how you're doing it, where you're going. And guess what? If you have no protocol, what that tells me is that we have got to build an infrastructure in which that is going to operate from. If I'm talking about behavioral change, I've got to make sure, was this behavior learned? Was the behavior inherited, or was the behavior taught? And then that's going to give me the ability to draft how I'm going to put these SOPs in place off of the inclusion of the direction that those communities give me in terms of where they want to go. So that's number one in terms of importance. Number two, look, let me be real clear. We hear municipalities, and we need their support, talk about these communities stepping up. But how are you going to get a community to step up and go into battle in a war and don't train that community and give that community the weapons to fight that battle? Every community that you want engaged in the process has to be trained, and that training has to be situationally specific for their environment. Third, that training, that protocol establishes the skill sets that an individual is going to operate from. So accountability. So I can look at and frame how people are supposed to be operating based on the accountability measure of what the protocols are going to establish. Lastly, as we talk about how we can be assisted in this process and the importance, you cannot expect to do comprehensive true training. You cannot expect to change communities and get them to refocus psychologically in terms of where they want to go and what they want to do. You have got to remove the fear factor. So from a municipal standpoint, it is imperative that a training has to become line item budgets. There's a saying we say from the street, a mistake is what? A mistake made twice is a decision. So we try to alter that. I'm gonna land on this. One of the things that is extremely imperative when you're talking about SOPs and training, you've got to be able to establish the pre-indicators. From there, you determine what the triggers are. From there, you determine the thought patterns that people operate from. From there, those thought actions are going to dictate the actions people take, which are going to lead to consequences. So you have got to get in that framework and draft what you do predicated on that, that structure.
Thank you, Dr. Basheer. It's really about the mechanisms of stopping cycles, right? Of violence, of trauma, of harm. You know, I don't know about everyone else, but I feel like I've earned 3 PhDs just in this moment. I have 2 more to go. So I want to thank you, Doctor. I want to introduce Jorja Leap, social justice research partnerships. So, you know, we've heard a little bit about the mechanisms that can be difficult, right? I'd like to hear more from you, Jorja, about the challenges around collecting data with these practices. We understand that that in getting funding, we need data, right? And I know. Give us a little insights about where the challenges lie here. Love to hear from you about what do you see?
Look, here's the biggest challenge of all. There is no public in research right now, and we have to end this now. There have been all kinds of studies. There have been all kinds of outcome evaluations around community-based intervention. These have happened in different venues, in different cities, in different regions, from Boston to Chicago to Los Angeles. The reviews are in. Community-based intervention is effective as a public safety strategy. Now, research and data has to become more of a partner, not even an equal, but a servant. Too often in the past, researchers and evaluators sort of parachute in, pass out a lot of surveys, put people in focus groups, give out some gift cards, and then say, woo, this works. Researchers that's not what they should be doing now. Now we need researchers to be active partners, to be part of what is going on, and to first and foremost in being public and part of the public, they need to use more than law enforcement data when they are talking about program effectiveness. That's right. You know, law enforcement has been first among equals. It's been badge heavy. It's been held as the holiest of the holies. And this has got to end. We have to look at measures of effectiveness that come, number one, from residents. In so many of the studies that I read and so many of the studies I review, I never ever see resident voice. And I have been so honored to work with the people who are on this panel, with Aqeela in the newer Community Street teams, with Melvyn in his deep dark past back in Los Angeles before he began serving in Chicago, and with Dr. Basheer. I've worked with him globally. I sort of have to chase him all over the world. But what has been a hallmark of our research together is to ask people in the communities that are being served, what do they think? What do they need? What is not working for them, as well as what's effective? We also have to go into schools. We have to go into the areas surrounding schools And we have to talk to the people whose lives are being affected, whose children are being killed, whose children are being sucked into the vortex of this public health issue.
Right.
But until we put the public into research, research is always going to be irrelevant, except for what's needed, what you said to begin with, Shakyra, for funding. Yes, we want the data for funding, we want the research for funding, but it's got to serve a greater need than money. And the need it's got to serve is the community, the children, the youth, the families, the elderly, and the stakeholders, the community-based organizations that work in these areas, in these regions. So I want to put public into research and partnership into research as we move forward. If we don't do this, we're going to fail.
Right. Love that. Love everything you said. That was absolutely amazing. Yeah, I'm not used to researchers talking like that. So
no, and we don't, because we act like a bunch of snobs who have
you said it.
We've received the tablets from on high, and we know the truth.
Right.
We don't know anything, and we should be talking to organizations, community-based interventionists. They are our teachers. We are their servant. And the other thing is, researchers should be able to raise their own funding so they can go into these settings and work with people over a lengthy period of time. It doesn't take a lot of money. It takes dedication and commitment.
Wow. So true. So true. So I want to thank you for that. I want to transition to Dr. Gary Slutkin. So I'd love to hear, you've heard everyone's different perspectives. That's part of like this huge equation of what we need and some of the challenges. From your perspective, what are some of the conceptual challenges that have prevented this field of work from gaining more traction, and how do we overcome it?
Yeah, thank you, Shakyra. And it's brilliant and wonderful to follow Aqeela and Melvyn and Aquil, and to hear Jorja's wonderfully flexible and practical view on all this. I mean, the main problem is basically that the problem is misunderstood. And the lens on the problem is incorrect. And the lens on the people is incorrect. I'm just going to tell you a little background on this. So, I used to work at World Health Organization. I ran their intervention unit. I worked on all kinds of problems, from smoking behavior to cholera to global AIDS, and recently COVID, Ebola. This is the only health problem that isn't being primarily managed by the health sector. Wow. And when you say the health sector, what that means is the community doing the work. And that's the way public health works, because all of these problems are best managed from the inside out. Mm-hmm. And when they're trying to be managed in any other way, it doesn't work. 20 years ago, I came back to this country. I should tell you, I'm not really managing the US operation for pure violence. We have a US team that runs that, and a Latin American team and so on. But we piloted the approach very similar to that has all the seeds of what you've been hearing today. And this 20 years ago showed a 67% drop in shootings and killings, and the worst in the most violent community in the United States at that moment. And people said, well, it must be a fluke. And we did it 4 more times and got 45% drops in shootings and killings, and still there was pushback. But at the same time, I went back to World Health and I showed basically what Aqeela and Melvyn and Aquil just presented. I said, this is the way we're doing this. And they said, of course, how else would you do it? How else would you reduce violence? Right. So, since that time, there have been about 10 independent evaluations of this work, including the Justice Department itself having done a study of 8 communities with 7 years and 10 years of baseline, with 4 investigators in 4 different methods, showing 40 to 70% drops in shootings and killings. The 40 to 70%, there are 13 communities that have gone to zero with this approach on the East Coast and in Latin America.
Wow.
And all of that, still, every meeting with authorities it's like you're coming out of asking for something that makes no sense, that they don't understand. So it's crazy, really, but it's primarily a racial issue in the way that people see the people and the way that they want to deal with the people. But let me just get to what is needed now. This approach that you've been hearing, Cure Violence Now is working in between 15 and 25 cities and about 100 communities. It is a continuous fight to get this into something called a budget. And what is being discussed here is not a project or a program. This is the system that needs to be inserted and normalized and institutionalized, not just alongside law enforcement, but as the central piece. And I'm not saying that in any political way. I'm saying that that's the central way, the basic way that any problem that has to do with humans always starts in that way. This is the way we worked on cholera or infant mortality or child mortality or smoking or breastfeeding or immunization or anything. It always has to be led by the community. So this is evidence-based professional work. And it needs to be in city budgets, in state budgets. There's enough evidence. There are so many things in the world, and in particular in this field, that don't have anywhere near the evidence that this work has.
Wow.
And the problem is the lens of what is being called criminal justice, and we don't use that word, it's an embargoed word. The lens is wrong. This is a health problem, a problem of health and behavior, and you need credible people to help people understand why and how to change, and then they conform instead of threat or other things which actually don't work. So the problem needs to be turned inside out, upside down, and in the budgets. And this is just last. This is a system. This is not New York. This has been in the budget since 2009. Los Angeles, this has been in the budget since 2006. Chicago, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And that's been the difference between those cities in that city during this period.
Wow.
Big cities.
So that was a lot. And so thank you. You said something that struck me that I'd like for you to just elaborate on. You said this is the only health crisis that is not being dealt with from a health lens, right? Or a health response. Why do you think that is?
There's at least two ways of answering this, maybe three. I mean, one is there's another sector that is there.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, when I was doing AIDS, there weren't people believing that police could stop people's sexual behavior.
Right.
That sector wasn't there. I should tell you, though, in everything, in Ebola and in cholera and everything else, law enforcement comes in and it makes suggestions, and usually it does not make things better, but you can discuss it through because they see that in the first place it's a health problem.
Right, right.
So another reason is that there's a lot of investment already in this other sector. But additionally, we, particularly in America, have a way of thinking that is punitive.
Mm-hmm.
And it's individualistic and punitive. And so there's a belief in punishment. And all you have to do is read the first chapter of a Social Psych 101 textbook, and you'll see that that's all old thinking.
Right, right.
punishment is not how behaviors are formed, maintained, or changed. It's essentially by modeling and support.
It's the American addiction, right? To punish, to be punitive.
And so, but not just to fight about that, we have to allow people to see that this is a problem of exposure and local norms that can only be changed. And it's just been shown so many times. I mean, you don't, bash people to breastfeed,
Right.
or to immunize, or to stop smoking, or to use clean water, or to change their sexual behavior, violent behavior. All these are just behaviors: sexual behavior, smoking behavior, violent behavior. These are just behaviors. And the way that behavior is changed is the way that these gentlemen have explained it. This is what we found, and this is what Cure Violence basically connected the dots on and demonstrated. And this is what, and so our job now is to basically to support this work, to allow people to re-understand it, to put it in the right shop, which is public health and community work, which are like this anyway. They're
Right.
always like this.
Thank you for that. First, I want to thank each and every one of you for just educating us. I have one final question that I'd like all of you to answer. You got one sentence. So let's try to do this. I'm gonna give you all a minute to process the question. And the question is, what would it take for the federal government to help scale this work? And what would be some of the considerations in doing so? So I want to give you a couple seconds. I went from a minute to a couple seconds, but I mean well. And I'd like for you to be able to answer that in about one sentence. And then I'd like to open it up to some of the questions that have been raised in the chat.
Here, before
Yes,
I answer,
Mr. Sherrills.
yes, ma'am. I wanted to say a little something about the relationship between community-based public safety initiatives and law enforcement.
Yes.
And I think it's important, right? Law enforcement have been, the single point of safety in our community, and it's been, horrific. We've put a tremendous amount of pressure on cops to be counselors, teachers, lawyers, therapists. I mean, and essentially, they're just not prepared, for that level of support, right? The number one, cause of police officer death is suicide. The biggest, those who are usually experience the brunt of them not getting the proper counseling and therapy and whatever healing modality is necessary so that they can function are usually their families. And most of their DV stuff goes unreported because they are the law, right? So this movement is also about creating balance in terms of a holistic approach to public safety. Our cops, they need counseling and therapy in healing modalities so that we could reduce the amount of excessive force issues and misconduct issues that are costing taxpayers hundreds of billions of dollars, in multiple cities across the country. I mean, in New York alone, 10 years, excessive force and misconduct, NYPD, $1.1 billion. We could pay for community-based intervention over and over and over again, just off of the misconduct and excessive force issues. And so this balances that because it removes the pressure. I mean, 70% of the calls that the police department gets are non-violent, non-serious, calls. Community-based intervention should be responding to those. Less than 1%, of crime doers are actually producing 70% of the crime in any respective community. So law enforcement should be doing more targeted deterrent strategies, as Dr. Slutkin was saying. Let's use the data, you know what I'm saying, to inform the strategy, right. Because this is a public health crisis, and a public safety, crisis. And I think that we're at the intersection of both of those works.
Here, just to add very quickly to what Aqeela said, we have to understand this frame right. There, epidemic violence, which is now endemic violence, police are also a victim of that.
That's right.
They're in it. There's this cloud of violence being done and people being exposed to it, and you have to interrupt the transmission. That's what these workers do, interrupt the spread. Well, the police are also in the middle of that, it having been spread to them. They spread it to others as well. So the idea that they come from somewhere and can just save the day. No, they're actually in the problem themselves,
Right.
not from their own fault. They just happen to be within this cloud themselves.
Right.
So
Right.
that's why this outreach system,
Yes.
you know, actually helps to make them safer too. And they know that. I've had city council of cities, the police telling them it makes it safer for them to have this work.
It really speaks to vicarious trauma and the impact of experiencing violence, witnessing violence, and how that impacts whether you're directly, you know, on the receiving end of that violence or not. It's just this collective vicarious trauma and how we need to treat that. Thank you both for raising that. And specifically, you know, how we balance, right? So back to our budget question. I want to start off with Melvyn. So the question is, what would it take for the federal government to help scale this work, and what would be some of the considerations in doing so, in one sentence?
Ooh, that's hard to answer in one
I know,
sentence.
I'm gonna send you good vibes.
I believe that in every other profession that's critical to the community in the country, they have lobbyists that are connected to the federal government. Violence prevention, we don't have that. And I think that we need to have proper representation to speak on the work that's happening in the community and the impact of our work.
Love it. See, that was amazing. All right. Okay. Dr. Basheer? You're on mute, Doc. I'm trying to unmute for you over here and I can't.
I think we need to unionize ourselves and implore the concept of shared safety, which means everybody has a responsibility of that safety within a given community.
Love it. Jorja?
A dedicated item in the budget guaranteeing funding for these programs nationally, an agreed upon basic model, training and technical assistance, and partnership research.
I love how direct you are. I want to do whatever you told me to do. Okay. Aqeela.
I'm going to be a little prescriptive. We know that there's $900 million that's allocated in the Biden-Harris transition budget, like for the first 100 days. So we'd like to see a large percentage of that money be allocated to a new federal demonstration project. Very much like, you know, like CBCR, community-based crime reduction, or one of the BJA initiatives, collective healing, 40 city, allocation, set aside, about $20 to $40 million for technical assistance and training for, for the community-based public safety, network. In addition to putting money towards new research, because we need to develop, like new tools around research and invest in like kind of innovations around technology to be used to support public safety work.
Perfect. Dr. Slutkin?
It's just building on this a little bit. I think that Jorja's prescription of the pieces is exactly right. This should be in the federal budget for several billion a year for evidence-based practice. And I haven't done the math on this for several years.
Thank you for that. Thank you all. I am gonna pull a question from the chat. Whoever feels comfortable jumping in and answering, please do. Does this, and this is from Robin Campbell, does this sort of intervention / reform meet with the same kind of resistance from police unions and prosecutor groups that other reforms invite? Who'd like to take that? George is smiling.
I'll quickly jump in, but others who know more, please come in after me. It depends. You have law enforcement departments, a minority, a small number that are open to this, a very small number, and open, not embracing it, but open. The vast majority are badge heavy and want to handle it themselves. But that's where what Gary Slutkin says is important. The research, you trot out the research record and say, this works. And by the way, law enforcement is coming around to the issue of we can't arrest our way out of it, as they keep saying over and over again.
Right.
There are others who know much more. I know Dr. Basheer has worked directly with law enforcement, as has Melvyn and Aqeela. So jump in along with you, Gary.
They want this, but they don't want to say it.
Right.
I mean, almost anyone at the district or precinct level, what they would say to me is, how come we don't have more workers here? How come you don't have workers on the other side of the freeway? How come my district doesn't have it? But when there's public discussion, it's a different story. And then I've been told over and over again, I really support your work. I really want your violence and the adaptations of it, but not out of my budget. This is like the cut to the chase.
Yeah, that's right.
They all want this. Actually, it's hard for them to say it. They think they're going to lose something. They're not. They're going to gain. They do.
Thanks for that. So I have another question here from George Durand. Who profits if the intervention and community-based strategies are proven effective? Who benefits from this?
The community benefits.
Everybody.
And yeah, exactly.
Yes.
It's a shared strategy. And so, everyone, boat is lifted. And just in terms of that, right? When we launched our community-based public safety initiative in Newark, right? We started with 16 independent contractors. I would say probably like 85% of these individuals, it was their first job. We're now the anchor nonprofit in the South Ward. We employ over 46 individuals, full-time and part-time staff. We've employed over the past 4 years, probably close to 200 individuals. Even our turnover, those individuals are still a part of our family. Because, there's an entry-level opportunity for folks. And then there's opportunity to grow. Our hope is that generations, right, of community folks. Now, a lot of our formerly incarcerated folks, we still have these, we have the Time Done campaign, right, that we're pushing, because once a person serves his time, it should be over. There should be a sunset somewhere in the near future in terms of moving that off of their record so that they could access gainful employment. So for a lot of our folks who are formerly incarcerated, this is a career path and opportunity. And so we're creating jobs and opportunities for those, man. I mean, my leadership team on my team, folks are making 80 plus, you know what I'm saying? Without high school degrees without college degrees and letters behind them. You know what I'm saying? They're in a position now where they can buy homes in their community. They can be real contributors, to an economy around safety. And that is the thing that's really powerful about this work, is that man, it restores balance in the neighborhood, because it puts the power of public safety back in the hands of the people in their own respective community, right? Yeah.
But everybody also benefits from this. Most of us that do this work are traumatized. And the reason we continue to do the work is to deal with our own personal trauma, as well as the trauma in the communities. And when you are able to create those anchors in the community members, law enforcement, the whole public safety sector, everybody in the societal structure is going to benefit, because at the end of the day, you give the ability for people to stabilize themselves, see hope, see their greatness, and then be able to move a process forward for individual perfection. So everybody benefits from this process.
It goes back to the balance that Aqeela was talking about earlier.
Shakyra,
yes.
I want to add to this, because Aqeela and Aquil answered it perfectly. But what also the other impact that it has is other community-based services can actually provide the service on the ground. You can't have services coming into a community when they're bullet flying. So when you alleviate the bullets from flying in a community, now you can bring in the wraparound services for the family, the community at large, and then now you can really start to heal that community. But they won't come in unless the bullets stop flying. And so that's important.
Correct. 100% correct.
That's right. Well, look, I am so absolutely honored to share this Zoom space with you. I wish we were all together in person. Thank you for all the knowledge that you have imparted, all the myths that you have dispelled. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We're immensely grateful to you. Two things I want to close with. First, I want to say Melvyn brought up the lobbying piece. So the National Coalition for Shared Safety is the solutions lobby. So we're focusing our efforts at the federal government so that we can see the level of funding and investments that Gary and Jorja talked about. And second thing, if you love this amazing panel and what these amazing human beings have shared, I'd like to welcome you to visit the National Coalition for Shared Safety's website at www.wesharesafety.us. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everyone.
Hey,
Take care.
good. Good work.